Number one of 21 Days with Jesus. For the next 21 days, I'm going to be looking at the life of Jesus Christ through the eyes of one of the gospel writers, John. And John was one of Jesus's closest disciples and one of the early disciples. And he wrote one of the four gospels that we have in the New Testament. And in fact, it's probably one of the most personal gospels that we have. And he wrote it, and he tells us why he wrote it. And in the very next to the last chapter of the Gospel of John, this is what John says. He says, "Many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name." John says right near the end, the purpose that I wrote this book is so that you believe that Jesus is God. And there's a lot of interesting things that have happened in the history of mankind. I remember when I was young, man landed on the moon. But there's no greater instance of something spectacular happening than God became a man. And that's what John is going to tell us. So this journey is going to take us 21 days, and there's 21 chapters in the Gospel of John, and I'm just going to give you every day a little summary, and encouragement to look, and I want you to read that chapter that day. And what do you think about Jesus? What did you learn about Jesus? I might have some resources down the road, but I want you to learn a little bit about Jesus from each chapter. So John chapter 1 is fairly lengthy, but you can read it in 5 minutes. And it starts off at the very beginning, just like the book of Genesis did in the beginning. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." John is calling Jesus Word. What does that mean? Jesus is the expression of God. I have a thought. You don't know what that thought is until I write it down in a word or until I say it. And Jesus is the expression of God. And it says that word, I love what it says. It goes all the way down to verse 14. It says, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. We beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." God became a human. The eternal God became a person just like us. Just like us without the sin nature. He became the Word. John doesn't talk about the birth of Jesus. It doesn't talk about the boyhood, the growing up of Jesus. It goes all the way back to before creation, that he was God. And then it picks up in his ministry in John chapter 1. And he deals a lot with John. There's a lot of different people named John in the Bible. John that wrote this book, but this is a different John. He talks about, we call him John the Baptist. And he actually baptized Jesus. And that baptism was as a symbol of his identification with mankind needing to be cleansed. And so John looks at Jesus, and in verse 29, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." Why did he call Jesus a lamb? He calls him the Word, now he calls him a lamb. Well, in the Jewish sacrificial system, and Jesus was a Jew, and he came to the Jewish people at the beginning to go into all the world, and they had a sacrificial system where they would sacrifice lambs to pay for their sins, to cover their sins. And it sounds kind of gory, but it just shows the extent and what sin can do and what sin must be paid for. And this looks forward to the time where Jesus would die on a cross. Later on, Jesus meets some of his early disciples. He meets Andrew and others. And I think it's interesting you find out when one person met Jesus, they had to go tell somebody else. One person met Jesus, they had to go tell somebody else. John chapter 1 is a great, great chapter. I hope you'll read it, see what you find out about Jesus, and just thank